What is happening, fellas? All right, I went ahead and got this done. So you can see how different my control horn location is from the stock location, which is pre-slotted up there above that I'm not using. And you can see the geometry that I like. So what we have here is a servo arm that is not 90 degrees to the servo body. It's what I've always called the to be determined point. So you're looking for a point that you can put a protractor, that the center of the protractor is this pivot point, the bolt that holds on your servo arm in the output shaft gear, so that's your pivot point, and your protractor has to be centered on that. From there, you're looking to find a point anywhere in the protractor that when you move the rudder itself, or an aileron or an elevator, the same distance each way. So let's say we put a throw meter up here on this rudder and we gauge 50 degrees each way. It's really easy to do on the ailerons where this whole thing gets more critical. Of course, push-pull gets super critical too. You measure the throw on the aileron, let's say 6 inches up, 6 inches down. So you find a point here on the protractor that you can go from. You adjust your push rod length to where you're at neutral again, you're at center from that given point, and then you deflect the surface that 6 inches up and down on an aileron, that 50 degrees left and right on your rudder, etc. on your elevators, and you could use throw meters for that, electronic throw meters, lasers, whatever you want to do. But at the same time, everybody does that. What I'm talking about, everybody does. Everybody gets equal throw with their radios with measurements of some kind. But they don't have that servo traveling the same number of degrees left and right for the rudder to go the same number of degrees left and right. So now in this case, by making myself this far offset from 90 degrees parallel or perpendicular, to the servo body, which everybody wants to do, which doesn't work, I'm able to get 56 degrees from that point I found. I'm slammed, full bevel. And from that, 56 degrees again that I'm moving when I'm slammed on that bevel. And then I'm back to that point. So I'd adjust the push rod length until I was able to establish that. So that's a start. That gets interesting. Why is it important? We talked about this for 21 years. In the case of a single rudder servo, which I'm going to try on here, but it may help me, add another one. It may gang it next to this one, but it may go push-pull on the other side. And if I do, then I want that servo on the other side to move that same rate of speed and that same length of distance as it moves left and right as the one on this side. If I don't, I was telling you in videos a week ago or so that it's going to be the opposite on the other side. So if you've got your geometry set up to where you're getting, your 50 degrees each way on your throw meter on your rudder, but this thing, well, typically if they're 90 degrees, if this servo arm is 90 degrees perpendicular to the servo body, typically what's going to happen is it's going to move 30 degrees this way and 60 degrees this way. And that's going to get you 50 and 50 over here. So it's the opposite on the other side. So when this one goes 30 degrees this way, that one on the opposite side of the plane is going 60 degrees. And then conversely, when you're going 60 degrees on this side, you're doing the opposite on the other side. So you're only going 30 degrees. That's a different rate. That's a different speed. That's a different distance. How can they sync up? They cannot. I've been saying this for 21 years. So, in this case with one servo, it wouldn't really matter. And if you wanted it to be perfect side to side for your feel, you could put differential mix in. I've even done it with my expo. You can change your expos and one side will go a little quicker than the other on your feel. But when you gang the servos, you got binding. So push-pull, I don't know, push-pull might be the worst. I think it is. As far as binding, wear on batteries, wear on servos, push-pull is going to be your worst if you don't set them up synchronized like this. But on ailerons, you're going to have to use a differential mix. That's the big thing. The ailerons, the same thing when they go down on the one side, that's the opposite deal. So if you're going a different distance, like 30 degrees one way and 60 degrees the other, which is typical on these protractors, to get your even throw of, let's say, 6 inches up, 6 inches down on the aileron, when the right aileron's going up, the left aileron's going to be going down. It's going to be going at the opposite rate and speed. So, add a differential mix, you'll be okay. But, do this, and they'll be going the same speed all the time. And this is also a way to get them synced up even between themselves on the single surface that they're on. So in that case, the two are not fighting each other throughout the range of travel as much. They wouldn't be fighting at all, and you may only be fighting a little on ailerons, but they won't be fighting at all. But on push-pull, you'll be fighting a ton. So just something that's good to know. I've been talking about it forever. Okay, so once you know that, that's like, this goes in steps. So you do that, and here's why I'm always talking about this control horn location. And there's an article that I mention frequently in my reviews and stuff that Kiki Simonzini did in 2004, a couple years after I started doing all this stuff, where he talks about this location and having this angle. And what happens is, invariably, from that perpendicular location that people try to get all their stuff into, if you want to get even travel here on the servo for even movement on the surface, then this is going to be tilted towards the surface the way it is now. This is going to be off perpendicular by way of the surface. So what happens then, if your control horn is up here at these higher locations, which look good like on geometry, like on not geometry, it just looks good on aesthetic. So it's up here. When you push it over and get that equal travel, then you could see here now, if I had this control horn, I would have my equal travel that I wanted, and I'd have my non-binding servos, which I wanted, right? But I would have this control horn way up here, and I'd have these push rods in line. And that's what you learn when you start doing this stuff. Then you realize the control horn's not in the right place. You've got everything synced up, but now you've lost your angles and leverage. So all you have to do is drop the control horn down, and then you get everything back. You get all the synchronization, but you get the leverage too. So another interesting point on this, let's see if I can get this to go all the way. I have a friend who's an engineer, and he said, well, as far as power, because I'm always talking about leverage and pry load, that I want side load instead of pry load and all that. And, he was telling me that, factually, that when the servo and the push rod are in a complete straight line, you actually have the strongest resistance that you can use with the servo. It'll be giving its greatest resistance to the control surface at that point when they're completely lined up in a straight line. These aren't quite, but if you could get them parallel lined up. He goes, you shouldn't try to avoid that, he was thinking. But there's two big problems with that. What I talk about is the pry load. So, when you get them all lined up, you get to where you're prying this way on this output shaft, which is what you don't want to do. These servos fail quite often from the output shaft gear, that it wallers around and wears out the top case. That's a very frequent way for servos to get worn out. And when you get them prying, from that straight angle where they're just prying this way instead of turning into it, you're having that problem. But the bigger problem, my other friend, Jason Benson, who has a video series, talks about the obvious thing that when the arm's in the center, a small amount of arm movement pushes the surface quite a bit. When you keep going around, you start making a big amount of movement with the servo, which makes virtually no movement to the control surface. So for multiple reasons, this is an angle that you're trying to avoid. So that's where I actually hit. That's where I'll actually be right there. So that's a decent angle on there. That works. So I have even degrees of throw for even degrees of travel on the surface, or maybe even degrees of travel on the arm for even throw, on the surface. I've avoided all the pry load. You see all these things are in line. What you're trying to avoid, and the reason that I have, in the neutral position here, you can see I have the ball towards the plane. What you're trying to avoid in this full pushing position is to where this push rod is angled this way, like this, because then you're really prying into this the end of this servo arm. And we all know what leverage means, and you get something out at the end of a lever and pry on it, it doesn't take much force for that to put a big load. So when we get into this area, now we're not prying on this output shaft at all. We're just using the power of the motor. So that is a lot. But, one thing leads to the other. And yeah, I want my servos synced up on my planes. I want that servo arm traveling the same distance from the to be determined center. So any arbitrary given point, I want it to travel the same distance left and right, same number of degrees on that protractor, to make my surface travel whatever distance left and right or up and down that it's going to go. And then I want all the other servos that are on that surface to do the same thing. And if they're on the other side of the plane, I want them doing the same thing. And then I want all my leverage and angles. So I've got to move my controller down, just like Kike talked about in 2004 in I think it was AMA magazine. I got copies of it. So you could combine all that and you're in good shape. So that's why I did that, and that's what I did. I'd love to do this all like with some 3D drawings. For 20 years I've wanted to do like not 3D drawings, but 3D video demonstrations, like from an expensive documentary or something. But I always do this one shot random discussing whatever the operation is. And I make more videos this way. I don't really, if I took the time and money to do what I'd like to show you guys, then I'd probably only do one and never do another video again. It would take so much time and money to do it right. But hopefully, kind of gain the concept from this. And as soon as I found the high-tech programmer back in 2002, and I was able to program the servos anywhere I wanted and not have that trouble of changing the sub trim and then having them not be linear left and right anymore, which I tested on a test jig that I set up with like an 8-inch arm and a protractor. And as soon as I could do that, then I started thinking about these other things. Well, if I can do that, then how do I sync this all up? And what we're asking here is already perilous. This is all funky geometry to begin with, the way we do all this stuff on this radius. We're not, we don't have any kind of gear that goes in line. Way back in the day, I think it was Peter Goldsmith or McConville. And did I buy that plane? That was Hildebrandt, that big 132-inch cap that Hildebrandt built. That may have been the plane that had it, or it may have been another one, but they just had a big, like 5-inch output gear here. And everything rotated on that, So what we do, and that's very linear, what we do is already a little bit dubious, So these kind of concepts that I've used for 20 years is just making this setup, work about as well as I could think of to make it work, other than changing it all together. And we use this for a reason. It's simple, it's easy, works fine. But might as well optimize it as much as possible if you can, especially if it's not that hard. And really, without even using a protractor, what I've come to is this is always going to tilt this way. And if you just took your planes and just didn't set them up at 90, but just throw them over 10 degrees and just dropped your control horns down to close to straight along the line of my fingers changing the focus, straight along the line of the servo body, anywhere in this range. This could even be a little bit lower, could be a little bit higher, but you wouldn't want that too much. But if you just tilted this 10 degrees, threw your control horns in line with the top of the servo body, you wouldn't have to really do anything else. Like, you'd be very close, and you'd be so much better off than stock locations that these things come in. You can also see what I'm doing here with the two conicals and the wider spacing on the trusses of the control horn, because I get freedom, you know, as I go out throughout this range of travel. See, that's a steeper angle, but it doesn't rub. And a lot of the stock ones, even with the stock setup, they'll bind, you know, right here. You'll just push them through, but you can't wiggle them because they're bound up. So this double conical setup, you know, it really gives you a lot of freedom on those angles, but it's still super strong. So, yeah, that's most of what I know about setting up servos with the arrangement that gives you best resolution, geometry. We didn't really talk about resolution, but you know, you can do this and just have 30 degrees each way off that neutral, and you'll get your full throw that you want. But that wouldn't be much resolution for the servo. So you're, in addition to all this stuff, you're also looking to, you know, for your control horn height and your servo arm length, to try to come up with about 50 degrees each way from that to be determined center, or, you know, 55. I've even done some with 60, but you have to have your angles perfect or you start losing leverage on different things. But 50 is a good goal. 53, 54, 55 is really nice off of center. You always hear me talking about that if, you know, are you getting 100 degrees? So that's another thing too, to get that resolution. So here you got the resolution, you got the geometry, you got the leverage, you got the synchronization, proportionally linear. You know, this is stuff I've been talking about forever, but yeah, I don't know how many guys care, but I've always thought it was important. All right, 16, 17 minutes later. Out.